and stay away from a man who gambles. Her warnings implied that I had a choice, that these things lay under my control. But when I was a child, she had often talked about the Chinese myth that every man and every woman was joined at birth to their mate by an invisible, enchanted thread. With this story, she said that there could be no controlling fate. The strange man ordered beef noodle soup and drank it quickly. He had placed his violin case in the opposite chair, upright and facing him like a lover. I watched his ivory chopsticks flash, and I envied the violin case, dark and slender, curved like a woman. Then he glanced at his watch. He flung down $1, seized his coat and violin, and walked out the door. I looked twice to make sure it was true. He had forgotten his hat on the chair. To this day, I don't know why I stole Tien's hat. Perhaps his solitude gave me strength. I looked around to make sure no one watched me. Then I slipped over to his table and picked up the hat, brought it back behind my counter. He had printed his name inside. Tian Sung. I waited through my shift. Da Dao, the manager, left to fix a leak in the kitchen, so I stood at the window, idle, as the wind blew mittens and lost bus passes past my eyes. The traffic thinned out, and a red-striped awning tumbled down the avenue. Toward the end of my shift, I caught Da Dao in the storeroom, sipping from a flask. He offered to snap a week of beans in exchange for my silence, but I promised I wouldn't tell anyone. Late that night, when the busboys had begun to vacuum under the chairs, the man reappeared in the doorway. I still remember his bare, wet head and sodden trench coat creased with snow. He walked over and stood before me. "You might have something of mine," he said, in Mandarin this time. "I don't think so. Would you please take a look?" I bent and looked under the counter. There was the hat, where I had hidden it, on the shelf behind some extra bud vases. I knelt and took it into my hands. Seconds passed. "Did you find a hat?" I heard him ask. I stood up and nodded, then shook my head. "Are you all right?" I held my hands behind the counter and did not answer. I could not give him the hat. My hands grew cold. I could not breathe. I looked at him. The storm had streaked his hair into his eyes. Surely the blackest eyes of any man I'd ever met, the eyelashes laid flat with melting snow. They held an expression of deep and painful privacy. And at that moment I believed I knew what would come to be. When I returned the hat, I would exchange it for the man who wore it. My senses opened. I grew large. I believed I heard, in the howling wind, a voice of admonition. But in the end I listened to the plunge and whistle of my blood. I put the hat into his beautiful, long-fingered hands. Behind this painted wall, beneath this layer of new sheathing, hides the story of our lives together. I have been silent many years, and my daughters have chosen to forget. But our family story lingers here. It waits under the floor. It has slid into the crawl space, wound around the stubborn beams and girders that were already old 30 years ago, when Tien and I first came to live in Brooklyn. At that time, the brownstones had begun to wear away. They stood in patient rows, like tablets in a soldier's graveyard, crumbled and soft around the edges. We considered other places, a Chinatown walk-up owned by Tao, a drafty room near the music school, and even a little midtown flat, as clean and perfect as a jewel box. But we decided to live here. It seemed that nothing in the world could disturb us on this neglected street, in these softly falling houses. Our third-floor flat
to keep listening to this audiobook. I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.